All right, I'm going to see if I can get through this fairly quickly. I'm not going to do the entire piece for you, um, but I am going to do the beginning. If you are planning to test, I think this could be a great resource and a great help. So I will put the link to this sheet music um, in the assignment as well in case you decide to use this piece. If you are not testing, you don't need to use this piece. Um, if you are testing, you don't have to use this piece, but I kind of encourage you to. So we need to we need to do something called we need to analyze a piece of music, and we need to explore musical findings, and we need to explore extra musical findings. Musical findings are simply like music theory things, and then extra musical would be like historical background information type stuff. So one of the reasons why I picked this piece is that it's probably one that you've heard of before, but hopefully one that you're not really familiar with. If you're not super familiar with it, I would say, unless you've performed this piece, this would fall under what's called the global context. So let me put this up here so I don't forget so you can add it to yours. Again, we want to try and keep track of this as much as possible. This is going to be AOI number 2, I believe it is, which is music for music. It's not serving an additional purpose. Okay. Now we need to do our research to make sure, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of what Mozart wrote was just for music's sake. It's not like he was writing for a film or a dance. He did write some operas, so that's music for theater, which is a different AOI. And then, as we talked about last time, AOI 1 is cultural, religious, political. So this is not cultural, political, religious, as far as I know. If it is, it would be an addition, not just instead of. And then for context, for most of you, this is going to be called global. It would only be personal if you listen to this all the time and this is one of your favorite songs. And it would be local if, let's say, you play in an orchestra and you have played this, which some of you, it's possible you have. Okay. But if not, if it's new to you, then we call it global. So I was trying to pick a piece that would fit this AOI and was global. Okay. And then there's another element to this that we will get to next assignment that could potentially, those of you testing, again, I'm trying to think ahead and plan ahead so that you can potentially do really well on the test. I don't want you to not do well on the test. And so I've been doing my research and trying to figure out how do we make this better? So I think I've figured it out. But I'm not 100% sure. But I think I'm doing much better at it. So we will see. So here's what I did: is I started to do the analysis, and again, it is okay to copy me since I'm your teacher. This would be the same as if I'm lecturing you. I think it's best if you put this in your own words. Okay. But what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at texture, and this whole piece is homophonic, so I'm breaking it down more specific. Homophonic texture with no accompaniment and homophonic texture with an accompaniment. And then there is the instrument that's playing the melody, and all the other instruments are playing the harmony. During the classical period, which Mozart was, what's great about this is there's usually only one instrument playing the melody. There's very little polyphonic texture, and so it's a little easier to hear and to follow. The other thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at articulation and we're going to look at dynamics in addition to texture, okay? Try and find some things to talk about. The other great thing is I've already separated out the form for you. So the first four measures are one idea, and so you can kind of look through, you can pause as you need to. I'm not going to literally go through every bit of this, all right? But I already did all that analysis for you. It's pretty basic. Okay, so if we start at the beginning, all of the instruments are loud. That's our dynamics, okay? And so we can go through here and say loud, or we can just say, forte, dynamic, and that is for all of them. I wish I just had an arrow and I could blast through. And then the texture is already here, so you can copy the texture. The other thing I want to look at is dynamic-wise, and again, this is going to come into play later. Not dynamic, articulation. So in this opening passage, there is some detached, and that occurs by way of the rests. So we can just say kind of detached because of the rests. Later, they're going to be detached for a different reason, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, and that's all of the instruments exhibit that, right? Yeah, all the instruments. Okay, now here we change the texture changes, and see how these instruments are playing repeated notes, whereas this has the melody. The first violin has the melody, okay? And right there we get our first indication of some articulation. In the first violin, we have a slur followed by a staccato, okay? So I'm gonna note that here, but only under the slur followed by staccato. Staccato. I don't know how to spell staccato. Sorry, I might have spelled it wrong. And then notice here at the end we get a few more staccato and slur, but there's that mixture. The melody is a mixture of slur and staccato, and then the accompaniment instruments are mostly playing repeated notes. Okay, so you can add some of that here. Now here, this is now I'm up to measure. What am I up to? Measure 11. Now we get several of the instruments have the slurs. All right, and then here measure 15. We get the combination of the slur and the staccato again. And then here we get the slur. So you can kind of feel free to write some of those differences in, okay? I'm not going to fill this whole thing out. I'm just kind of talking you through it. What I wanted to point out also is that right here is where we get our first dynamic shift. Okay, so measure 11. I definitely want to, that's called piano dynamic. Okay, piano is the P. So all of the instruments, and I'm gonna put that across: piano dynamic, piano dynamic, piano dynamic. All the instruments are quiet, okay? And then notice here that the instruments are getting a little bit louder. They have these loud interjections, the sforzandos, okay, followed by piano. Suddenly loud, SF means suddenly loud, and then piano. It doesn't actually mean suddenly loud, but that's how we interpret it in English. And then here, finally, in this measure, we get everybody is forte again. So you want to mark those dynamic contrasts here in this table. Again, I'm not doing it all. Notice that A, boom, all the instruments are piano again. Notice here in this section, look at all the staccato that the melody, or actually that's not the melody, the accompaniment has. The melody has slurred notes and then detached with rests. So recycle that verbiage I use. Slurs and staccatos, no written articulation. There's the dynamic of forte. Okay, so I think you can see all of the answers are right here on the page, and it's just a matter of you marking up the music in this way and filling out this table like this, okay? I know all of this doesn't make sense, and it might not feel like a ton of information, but it will make more sense later. And then I put down just a few basic musical findings here. This is the first movement of a multi-movement piece, okay? So I think there's 4 movements, but I don't know, you'd have to check in this work. The work is called A Little Night Music. Eine Kleine, a little Nachtmusik, night music. And the form of the first movement is what we call sonata form. I don't have time, and I don't need to teach you what sonata form is, but you just need to know that a form is like a roadmap that you're going to follow, right? The different sections, and in the classical period, almost always the first movement was in sonata form. And then the part we analyzed is the first part of the first movement, and that is called the exposition. And the exposition ends when we get to the repeat sign, and we end in a different key. We actually end in the key of D major, which is called the dominant. We began in G major. For extra musical findings, this is where you'll need to do your research, right? And you can ask a lot more questions than just this. I just started. You know, where was Mozart living? Maybe had he recently moved, or had he been in this location for a long time? Mozart was one of the first composers to go out on his own. He was not employed full-time by the church or by nobility. He was like, screw it, I'm going to be my own, entrepreneur. And so who he composed for is actually really important because he was trying to scrape together money and he was composing for all different kinds of people. Whereas Bach was employed by one church most of his life, and almost all of his works were written for that church. Mozart is writing for all sorts of different people, all sorts of different nobility, and for the church, but he wasn't actually employed by any one individual. And so who he's writing for, we find actually does sometimes play into what he writes, okay? Also, what other works is he writing during this time? Make sure you annotate everything you find. You have to annotate it clearly, right, if you are testing, okay? If you're not testing, it's not as big of a deal. All right, hope this helps.